Welcome everyone to the Betty Eats podcast, where we talk about real recipes created by real people, not AI, and all of these are tested. So today on the program, we have Rachel Ciordas, and she's a longtime chef, and she's also a longtime cooking instructor. She's a recipe developer specializing in gluten-free recipes. And I'm very excited to talk to you today, Rachel, because I have lots of questions. So welcome to the program. Something that I think most people deal with now is the whole gluten-free, someone in their family or someone in their circle of friends. And so that can cause kind of this mild panic for people when they've got to put together something gluten-free. And I was going to ask you how you chose to specialize in gluten-free, because I think there's a story behind it.
There is. I decided to specialize in gluten-free after my son was diagnosed with celiac disease, actually several years after, because at the beginning, I
Mm.
didn't feel like I was an expert yet. It was quite a mind shift. As you said, I've been a chef and a cooking instructor for many years, so I was already working as those things. And I had a little bakery as well, which was um, a wheat flour bakery. And when my son was diagnosed with celiac disease, it was a big change for our family, for the way we eat, for how I could work, what kind of recipes would work for us. So it was really, really hard. Um, Going through that and learning to cook differently and to make those favorites that I had in the bakery, that I had taken classes, uh, gluten free for, my son. And I have other family members as well, sort of an expanding, it usually runs in families. So, and other members of our family, it really um, was a journey. And so as that progressed, I was teaching cooking classes and I thought, this is the thing that I know how to do that is not everyone knows how to do. This is the thing that is really a pain point for a lot of people. So I started to specialize in um, gluten-free cooking and gluten-free baking as well, because the thing that a lot of people miss is
Oh, yes,
bacon.
for sure. Um, and I want you to maybe explain, because I think that sometimes people don't really understand that there is a difference between a gluten intolerance and celiac. I mean, sometimes they can show up in a similar way with symptoms, but there really is a difference in the two.
Yeah, there really is. And, there's a range for gluten intolerance. So gluten is it's a protein found in grain, in wheat, and it's stretchy, and um, it makes things hold in air. So things like all those puffy baked goods, right? And it is in some people they have a hard time digesting that protein. And so people who are gluten intolerant, they might be able to eat some amount of a dish that had wheat or barley or rye in it, or they may not. But what happens for someone with celiac disease, which, by the way, is a disease that has been around? It was discovered uh, like BC by a Greek doctor and has, they found it in families in ruins in Rome. I mean, it's just existed for all time. It was just not very well understood. But what it does is people have celiac disease, their body actually attacks themselves. It's an autoimmune disease when they are exposed to any small, tiny amount of those grains that contain gluten. So it would be like if I took my son to a restaurant and he decided to order French fries. If someone had fried a chicken nugget in that fryer at any point during the life of that oil and that flour, then he would become sick because there would just be microscopic amounts, right? Or if we went somewhere that was using flour and tossing pizzas in the air, and the flour, got into the air and landed on his food, then he would become sick. So it was uh, more extreme. It's more serious. A lot of times you'll see on restaurant menus something that says like gluten friendly or gluten free ish. There's a lot of terms. So for me, that's a flag where I have to ask questions and say, okay, so my son has celiac disease and we really have to avoid things touching. Is that what you have, or is that something else? And sometimes it's not. So that may be fine for someone who has gluten intolerance, where they just say, oh, that's okay, as long as it doesn't have gluten in it, that's fine. For someone with celiac disease, they may not be able to eat that. So it's all the way gluten free. Very, very.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It is more serious. And we have dealt with that in our own family as well. And it was an intolerance though. And it was for one
Mm.
of my kids when they were very, very young. They could not do gluten or dairy.
Mm.
What was so interesting was when they were about maybe 2 or 3 years old, they knew, they couldn't eat certain things. And I want to say it was a neighbor girl that, very innocently had given them something. I want to say it was like Teddy Grahams or, something cute.
I think kids would
And
love.
yeah, and she didn't know because she had never seen it before. And I walked outside and I just gasped because I thought, oh no, because it was always
Oh,
here comes a Benadryl dose for you.
yeah.
And and so I saw that she had eaten it and nothing happened. And I was like, that's kind of weird. And so I asked for the box and I looked at the box to make sure, like, maybe this isn't a wheat one, but it was. And so I thought, well, maybe her system is developing to where she is okay with it now. And
Yeah.
so it was funny. The next morning, I thought, okay, I'm just going to go all in. And I gave her a piece of toast, like regular wheat toast. I know. And I had the little Benadryl bottle next
Yeah,
to me.
you were ready.
Um, it was funny because I put it in front of her and she was like, I don't know, 3. And she looked at me like, I can't eat this, right? And I was like, you know what? Go ahead, try it. Let's try it. And she ate it and had no issues. And so, yeah, it was kind of weird. And so I talked to the
Amazing.
pediatrician about it, and they're like, sometimes kids do outgrow an intolerance just for
Okay.
whatever reason, but that's very different from, like you said, an autoimmune disease, which is or genetic markers. If you have genetic biological markers, that's a different story. And that's not something that, people can, I don't think, outgrow from what I understand. And so there is a real difference. Um, yeah. So thank you for explaining that because I think sometimes people they don't get it. They don't understand how, kind of serious it can be, especially in a restaurant situation where,
Yeah,
you
those
don't
those
have as much
situations.
control. Well, I was reading on your Substack, and I did not realize how many of the cooking classes that you have posted on there. And so, and I read that you were this cooking instructor. Um, Tell us about that. Like, how did you get into that? How did you decide I am going to be a cooking instructor and cooking
You
classes?
know, I really love teaching cooking classes. It is, I think, every time there's a break in the cooking classes for some reason, I just find a way to bring it back because it's one of my very favorite things. I love that feeling of being with people and teaching them and getting to see their eyes light up. Um, I started out working in hospitality. I came from a family of great cooks. Grandmother, mother, my father, my dad's a great cook. We live in the middle of the country, so there's a lot of outdoor cooking here. There's a lot of barbecue and grilling, and my dad is the person of the fire, and so we always had big gardens, lots of vegetables and fruit. So I loved cooking from a very early age. And then I started working in restaurants and hotels. I actually got a hospitality degree. I worked in some national parks. I actually met my husband working at Yellowstone National Park. How I found him. And, I had a great time in all these different parts of the hospitality industry. But then I got a job as a manager of a cooking school, and there were, I think, 40 or 50 chefs that worked for us. Hundreds of cooking classes every year, lots and lots of private ones, public ones, kids. We had a barbecue institute. It was a really fun learning experience with all those different chefs. And I started teaching some cooking classes for that school, actually in the farmer's market that was across the street. And it was a really fun part of my job. And then I started teaching more cooking classes and more. And then I realized that that was the part that I really liked, more than all the other things. I mean, everything was great, but I loved being with people and talking to them about food and seeing them become confident in what they were doing. And, someone getting excited because they learned how to cut an onion or made a loaf of bread that rose or, those kind of things. And so I just continued to do it. I started freelancing and working at that school and also several other schools. I started working, teaching cooking classes, at private businesses and hospitals. So that's what I've been doing for quite some time. Uh, and then I just thought it was a natural fit, integrate it into the uh, membership on my newsletter. I was like, obviously, there's all these people out there that are reading what I'm writing. I want to see them. I want to talk to them. So I love that part of it.
That is so interesting. I love that you've kind of, like you said, woven the two things together of, the types of recipes you specialize in, plus your background from teaching cooking. And so that is really wonderful. And I love that they're on demand too, so that if somebody can't join you for a live class, they can do this kind of in their own home, at their leisure. And so I really love that as a resource. I think that's awesome. So, yeah. Um, Something else that I noticed too is that with gluten-free cooking, and I'm sure there you have lots of little tips and tricks and just basic information, that there really is things that you have to pay attention to. And so one of the things that I always like to talk about on the show is how listeners can spot a recipe, because there's so many AI things and so many untested recipes that people post. It's just maddening. But I think that there are things to look out for. So for gluten-free recipes, what do you feel like are the hallmarks? Like when you're looking for a gluten-free recipe, let's say for bread, we were talking about bread, like what are kind of like the things that readers are like, I really need to keep my eye out for these to know that this is going to work, that it's not going to be a waste of time and money. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a real danger in gluten-free recipes because gluten-free is so finicky, and there are little tips and tricks that you need that if you have an AI recipe, I really think it is unlikely to work. I've seen quite a few out there. And so it's important, I think, especially for people who are just starting out and may not be able to just look at a recipe and say, that's not going to work. I don't think that
Right.
if I do these steps, that it will come out, to pay attention
Right.
to a few things. Um, First of all, most of the development that is coming in gluten-free it's still coming from small creators all over the world. So, where, there are a lot of genres of food that are widely known and, maybe the knowledge is very distributed. It can come from all different places. Usually, the recipes in gluten-free that are found are coming from someone who specializes in that and they're making developments, so if you look at a recipe and it comes from a site that does not have a lot of gluten-free knowledge built into it from the creator, that is a red flag. Um, it might be
Good to
AI.
know.
Yes,
Hmm.
because, developments are being made all the time and they're usually small steps. A lot of the traveling that I have done around the world is to visit people who are experts in gluten-free, who don't have large web presences because all this development, like the little things, are happening by people. So look to who wrote that recipe, first of all. Who wrote that recipe, and do they have a wide base of knowledge in this specific gluten-free? Another thing that you should look at is the pictures. It's very important in gluten-free baking that you look at the pictures and see, first of all, does that does that look like anything that would represent what's written in the recipe? I see a lot of times, I think it's on sites that are very specified diet sites. You see a lot of pictures that really don't match for gluten free, for keto, for low carb, in groups online, and it'll have a recipe. And my first red flag is they're showing me a picture of something that's square when the recipe says to make it round. They're telling me it's going to rise 6 inches high, and on that picture, it is not. It's doing something else. It's a slightly different color. Sometimes the picture doesn't match at all, and then it's really easy to tell. They've given you a recipe for focaccia, and focaccia does not look like a loaf of sandwich bread. So then you think, okay, this is not a person. This is not a human. um, there are some flags as well that get used in um, wheat flour, traditional baking that really don't get used in gluten-free baking. So they can be words to look for. One thing is overwork. Recipes that warn you not to overwork the dough were probably not written by someone who works in gluten-free, because gluten-free dough, except if you have some inclusion that you're going to smash, like little pots of butter or chocolate chips or something, can't be overworked. Gluten gets tough when you mess with it too much. Gluten-free dough doesn't have any of that in there, so you could spread dough till your arms fall off, till your mixer breaks. It's never going to get tough. Your biscuits are never going to get tough. So if they say something's going to get tough or you're going to overwork it, that's an out. If your recipe for a gluten-free bread tells you to punch down dough, that's like a clue that it's AI. You never punch down gluten-free dough. So anyone who makes gluten-free bread would say, nope, that's not the one that was written by a machine. You know, there's some clue words in there that you can look for.
Mm.
Yeah.
Those are really, really important things because, I do not bake gluten-free, but I do bake bread, and those are, like you said, those are words that I use and see all the time of punching down dough, not overworking it because it does get tough, and I didn't think about that in terms of gluten-free baking. So that is a really huge clue, huge tip for, people looking to bake a gluten-free whatever for, friends coming over or whatever. And so, yeah, that's really important. Wow. Now, so you talked a little bit about growing up and how you have really good cooks in your family. Are you now? Obviously, you didn't really cook gluten free before your son was, had celiac. But are you able to adapt maybe some family recipes to gluten free? Is that something that you have found yourself doing?
I'm really lucky that my family is really inclusive and wonderful. And like I said, we have more than my son, there's more family members. So I think not only I have, but also other members of my family have taken our family recipes and really made sure that everybody could experience them.
Yeah.
Um, at the holidays, when we all get together, there are everybody's favorites, and they've been made gluten free so that can all enjoy it. And one of the best things you can do with gluten-free recipes is give people a little taste, a little nostalgia, a little taste of what they loved from years past, because a lot of times that's a little more difficult to achieve gluten-free or a little bit more difficult to find. It's not like many people are far away from a gluten-free bakery or don't have one that they could access, and maybe they can't go get an apple pie and think about the one that grandma made. So I think that it's really important, a really important part of the work.
Yeah, yeah, that's really wonderful. And you talked a little bit too about traveling, and I noticed you have some travel guides posted. And how difficult do you feel like it is when you are traveling? You obviously do your research before you go somewhere because you've got your list. But what do you think when people are traveling? Do you recommend that for sure? Because I can't imagine arriving somewhere and being like, huh, I wonder if there's gluten-free restaurants here.
It is important. I mean, I love to travel and I love that feeling of being free and not having to plan every single thing in your life. But when you're traveling gluten free, you do really need to use the tools that you have and do a little bit of research so you can have a really great time. And depending on your destination, really, there's a huge difference where you're going, how easy, how difficult it's going to be for you to, you know, be safe and find delicious food in that in that place. So I love to travel to Italy. It's one of the easiest places in the world to travel gluten free. There are amazing restaurants. There are incredible products. It's so wonderful and easy. That I had, figured out the system of how to find the restaurants. There's a national association, but it was very, very easy to do, and people know what you're talking about. We went to Morocco. Morocco was much more difficult, so it took a lot more legwork. So depending on where you're going, even in the United States, where I live, there are options, um, but it's I live in a city, and if I lived 2 hours away from here, it would be extremely difficult. I've traveled to other parts of the country that are far easier on the coast, the west coast and the east coast. It was easier either way I went.
Mhm.
So just understanding where you're going and taking a look ahead of time. And also, I really suggest that if people are traveling to a country that they don't speak the language, having something with you, a card translated with your needs for restaurants is huge. Because sometimes it's hard to communicate to a chef who's busy. It's a lot to ask somebody to stop everything they're doing and do something completely different and watch everything and change everything. So being able to communicate what you need and why in writing can really help you out.
Mhm. Wow, I hadn't really thought about that is to have something like pre-printed in, whatever language of the country you're going to. That's really, really smart. That would really make a big difference, especially like you said, it's like some people are just more familiar with it. And so for us in our family, it's dairy free. 3 out of the 5 in my immediate family just cannot do dairy. And so yes, it's easier because I'm in California. We have every kind of milk imaginable here. But it was funny. My daughter had gone to somewhere in the Midwest. I won't even name the state, and it was a smaller town. And she went to a Starbucks there, and she usually orders, her coffee with almond milk. And she was kind of horrified because she ordered it, and they were like, "You want what kind of milk?" And she was like, almond milk? And they were like, well, I've heard of that, but so I think they had soy. So she wound up going with soy, but she's like, who's never heard of almond milk? And I'm like, girl.
That
not
is so much
everybody in the
so.
world has this issue. So, but it can be tricky. And, I think sometimes people aren't aware that maybe where they're traveling, especially if they're going to go back and visit family or whatever, that it can, people might not be familiar with that. And so that's really, really smart, I think, too, to, like you said, have something in writing. So now what country do you feel like has been the easiest for you to find gluten-free things? Is it Italy,
I
you
think
think?
the easiest are Italy and Spain. So easy.
Wow, that is so surprising. Wow.
It
Like
seems like they wouldn't be
Italy.
because there's such an emphasis on bread and pasta and things like that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
actually, they have the best in the world, both of those countries. Bread, pasta, I mean, amazing. And
Wow.
when you speak to people, they know what you're talking about. They understand what that is and can tell you if they can do that or not. And that confusion can sometimes be a problem uh, in different places, especially where I live. Definitely, it can be a problem where people say, "Oh, can I do gluten free?" And maybe they're thinking vegan, or maybe they're thinking gluten is dairy, or yeah.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah. Sometimes people say, "Is this gluten-free or is this dairy-free?" And they're holding up an apple, and it's like, well, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's
if
education. They just they haven't read enough about it or they just don't know enough about it, but
yeah.
it is funny.
And why would you if you didn't have to? I totally get it. But if you know
Yeah.
anyone who's gluten free and needs a vacation, I vote go to Italy and Spain. They're
Hey, hear that, everybody? This is your sign to do that. Go there. Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Well, we always talk about a tried and true recipe that listeners can jump on, something that just is, you know, always works for you. And what are you sharing with listeners today for your tried and true recipe?
I have a focaccia recipe, a gluten free focaccia. And I love to make this for gatherings, for parties, for just our family, turn it into a pizza. It always works. Everybody loves focaccia. It's a great starter bread. If you're not familiar with bread baking, you don't have to be afraid of this. It is very forgiving and it just can be used a million different ways and be wonderful. It can be your breadsticks. It can be, all sorts of things. And it's fun and easy for people to make with their family too. You don't have to worry about it rising really big. It's out on a pan. It cooks nicely in a home oven. I just think it's a great gluten-free bread to start with. If you're missing bread, that's the one.
Hmm. That's great. I know that sounds so delicious. I was looking a little bit at that, and you can throw in garlic and herbs, and I thought, okay, I'm in. Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Um, so thank you. I will put a link to that in the show notes. Um, can we talk a little bit about gluten-free sourdough? I know
Absolutely.
sourdough is like a huge, I mean, I guess it got huge during, lockdown. Everybody seemed to be making a sourdough. I
Yes.
have not jumped on that bandwagon. I look at the directions and I'm like, this sounds too much like raising a child. No. But but I did not know that there was gluten-free sourdough. So that's super interesting. So how did you come upon that, or how did you put that together?
Sourdough is so wonderful, and it's such a great bread. It's such a great flavor. Um, and we had the same issue that everybody did in lockdown, right? There was, I had just purchased, luckily, one of those big 1 pound blocks of yeast. And I was like, okay, so I'm set for a little bit. But I bake a lot and I was still teaching classes online. And so I went through that. And then, so there's a yeast shortage, couldn't get a hold of it. So started to explore sourdough a little bit.
Mm.
And really, the way that you make the bread in the end is a little bit different because it's gluten free, but using the sourdough and maintaining the starter very similar to what other bakers would do. And you're right, it is kind of a, you do have to maintain it a little bit. But when I talk to people, I do let them know that I'm more of a lazy sourdough person. So instead of maintaining it on a very rapid schedule of every day, once people get their starters established, or if you know somebody who has a gluten-free starter, actually you can order dehydrated starters from a couple of companies, and you can start them. Once you've got that established a little bit, really you only have to think about it once a week. So I set a little alarm for myself, and I, maintain it once a week, and then I put it back in the fridge unless I'm baking bread with it. And I maintain mine with brown rice flour. So instead of wheat flour, it's brown rice flour and water, and I mix those together, and it's got a lovely fermentation. It rises in the jar just like you would see another sourdough starter do. Um, and gets nice and bubbly. And I use it to leaven, breads. But then if you have some extra, it's great for making pancakes. You can turn it into crackers really easily. Uh, there are so many cakes. There are so many ways that you can use it. It adds a little tang, it's fermented, so it's got that lovely flavor and also all those good bacteria in there. So I really think that it's fun, but it is a once a week. It's a once a week deal. If you want to do gluten-free sourdough, you have to go back and visit it and give a little food and water once a week. Give it a stir. Put that back in your fridge and not forget about it completely. Although I have stressed that a little bit on vacation. I've come back and woken it back up again. I don't
Well,
worry about it too much.
that's good to know that it's resilient like that, that you can do that. That's really
Yeah.
great because, yeah, I know when I was reading the instructions for, a wheat-based sourdough, I just was like, oh, I'm out. No. But, you know, I think I like the idea of, being very sort of free form with it and not so hovering, not being the helicopter person of
Right. I
let me
mean,
hover over
sometimes
you.
people have time for that, and sometimes you don't, but you still want great bread, right? And it's totally possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's delicious. I have a friend who, and it's funny because she doesn't even consider herself a baker, but she got on this sourdough kick, and she's kind of like you, where she lets it, chill out in the fridge. She doesn't hover over it, and but she puts sliced jalapenos and cheese and garlic in hers,
Listen,
and it's amazing. So I'm like, well, as long as I have you as my friend, I don't need to have a sourdough starter. I can just come to you for bread.
right. Well, it's a
Yeah.
community,
Yeah.
so you're actually
Yeah.
doing service there.
Yeah.
That's
That's
great.
fun. Well, so what are you looking forward to this year? What are you kind of working on? Do you have a cookbook in the works, maybe? That would be
I've
really
been
fun.
working on one, like a proposal for one. So everybody cross your fingers that that will happen. That would be lovely. There is definitely a part of the gluten-free market, the baking market, that I feel like is a little underserved. So I would love to get this book out there. Um, I think it would be great. I think people would really enjoy it. So hopefully, hopefully I will
Yeah.
have more news to share on that one.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. I think you're right because I think that it is like you said, there's so many bad ones floating around, I think. And just from what we've talked about today, it's obviously, you know it inside and out. And there's a lot of things, and I thought I knew a little bit about gluten-free baking because I did do it for a very short time, but I mean, there's things that I learned today, so I'm like, oh wow, I think that would be a really great book that would serve a lot of people. So
Oh,
yeah, so
and
fingers crossed on
fingers
that one.
crossed. And things change too. Even in the last 10 years that I've been doing this and baking gluten free, things have changed so much and there's been so much progress that a book now, would have totally different techniques than what I started. So there are new things to say that would make it,
Right.
more delicious.
Right. Well, and I think too now there are more alternative flours available and other things available. Gosh, I remember when we were gluten free for a short time because of my daughter. There, regular grocery stores, you couldn't find a loaf of gluten free bread or almond flour or anything like that. That did not exist. I think Trader Joe's had that really tiny, tiny loaf of bread for like $9 or some ridiculous price like that. But that was the only
Slices
choice.
with this big.
Yes. Yeah. Like the size of a deck of cards. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, cool. Yeah. So that's so interesting. Well, as we wrap up, where is the best place for people to connect with you online? Where can they find you? How do you like to be contacted?
Yeah, so they can find me on my website. It's www.rachelciordas.com. And that also hooks in with my newsletter. So they will be able to see all the content of my recipes that I put out and the archives and the cooking classes and all of that. And also, there's a contact me, and I get lots of questions, and I actually love it when people contact me and say, "Oh my goodness, I made this tart, and what did I do wrong?" How can I love it when people call me because it's just so fun to help them um, make delicious food, and oh, now that Easter is saved or whatever it is, the Christmas bread that they really wanted to make, and here's some tips, and it's really fun. So if people want to contact me with any of that, I would love
Yeah, that's awesome. That's the educator in you.
it.
Which is great. I mean, that's, especially if you have a new diagnosis, that's hard, to suddenly sort of like change gears. So, yeah, I will be sure to put links to that in the show notes too. That way people can find you and connect with you and ask you all kinds of questions.
I think
Aw,
I really like people. Yeah.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for being here today and talking to us about what to look out for and offering just a wonderful recipe too for people to try. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
it.